Good evening, friends, and welcome to the creepy No Pants Library. You may wear pants, but we strongly recommend against it, for by the end of the episode, they will surely be wet. I can assure you that I am not wearing any pants. This will be an 8-part series detailing the writings of Gerald Tomlinson, esteemed author of the book 7 Jersey Murders. Each episode will feature a chapter which covers one significant murder in the history of our great state. Tonight we begin with the introduction. Introduction. This book is in some respects a prequel to my Murdered in Jersey, published by Rutgers University Press in 1994 and reissued in an expanded edition in 1997. That book begins with the Hall Mills double homicide of 1922, one of the classic unsolved crimes in American history. So fascinating did the Hall Mills case seem to me at the time that I later spent approximately 4 years researching the book Fatal Tryst, Who Killed the Minister and the Choir Singer, in 1999. I chose the Hall Mills affair to open Murdered in New Jersey because it struck me as being the premier New Jersey murder case of the early 20th century, which it surely was, prior to the crime of the century kidnapping and murder of Charles Lindbergh Jr. in Hopewell in 1932. With more than 150 front-page articles in the New York Times, the largely forgotten Hall Mills case had no equal in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. For that reason, I decided to skip the earlier, lesser-known cases and to begin Murdered in Jersey with the 1922 Hall Mills blockbuster. After Murdered in Jersey was published, it occurred to me that there surely must have been some intriguing, if less sensational, homicides in New Jersey before the cause célèbre, in which the minister and his married mistress were gunned down in a secluded Lover's Lane in Franklin Township. A bit of research proved my supposition to be true. There were quite few cases in the early years of the 20th century that had definite points of interest, as Sherlock Holmes would say. While working on Murdered in Jersey, it became clear to me that I had assembled more material on many of the cases, especially the major ones, than I could possibly use in a 3 or 4 page account. I concluded that if I decided to deal with some earlier New Jersey homicides, I would go into each of them in more detail. None of the 7 cases had covered, None of the 7 cases seemed to warrant a whole book. That's kind of rude. I hope my murder would warrant a whole freaking book. Although, in 1968, Norman Zierold had covered O.C. Sneed's bizarre death in a fascinating volume entitled 3 Sisters in Black. But the Sneed affair, like several others through the years, was a kind of an anomaly. It was a New Jersey case only because the victim died in East Orange. All of the main characters involved in it had closer ties to Tennessee, Virginia, and New York than to the Garden State. It should be noted that 7 Jersey Murders is an inexact title, since one of the homicides, the 1910 shooting of the Reverend Elmsey Armstrong and his wife, Anne Rue Armstrong, was a double murder. Thus, there are 8 murders in the book, but only 7 numbered cases. Similarly, in the revised edition of Murdered in Jersey, there are 65 numbered cases, but 128 victims. 7 Jersey Murders begins with the tragic death of a lovely 17-year-old Patterson Mill girl who ought to have been on her guard against mashers, but apparently wasn't. In 1900, when Jenny Bolshaita met her fate, The economic and social gulf between the male swells of Paterson and the girls who toiled in the silk mills was wide, but not unbridgeable. With luck, Jenny might have married a handsome man of means. Without luck, however, she was raped and left to die by 4 purported gentlemen, 2 of them married, who figured that knockout drops were quicker than either candy or liquor. All 7 cases in this book are unusual in some way. Perhaps the most straightforward and unmysterious is the shooting of Mary Bevins in Peter Valleys in 1903, even though its motive can only be inferred. Concerning the death of Evelyn McFarland, 1911, there is some doubt, but not as much, as to whether it was actually murder. The last 2 cases in the book, the murders of John V. Piper, 1917, in New Brunswick, and Jeanette Lawrence, 1921, in Madison, are nominally unsolved. There were arrests and trials in both cases, but no convictions. The reader may find the 2 killings less impenetrable than the trial jurors did. It is probably worth noting that the prime suspects and ultimate defendants in these cases, Dr. William Condon and Francis Cluxon III, had plenty of money, as well as prominent names in their community. 6 of the 8 victims were women. Once, when interviewed about Murdered in Jersey, I was asked if women victims predominated in those post-1922 cases, and I said no. Gangland slayings, the murders of businessmen and other prominent citizens, and the death by violence of 11 state troopers tipped the balance of victims in that book slightly towards men. But from 1900 to 1920, before Prohibition, before women began to gain equal rights, and before the founding of the state police, the most highly publicized murder cases of this in New Jersey did involve women as victims. The 7 murder cases in this book will be new to most readers. Each is a case that mirrors its time. Taken together, they comprise a part of the social history of that era. Join us next time for Chapter 1 of 7 Jersey Murders, entitled Death of a Mill Girl.